Hello YouTube, this is Mr. Shining Time. Thanks for listening to my videos. I just want to discuss something that's a very interesting topic on a comment that someone made on one of my videos. And it is called Pan-Africanism. Now, I wasn't too familiar with what Pan-Africanism was. I had to actually look it up on Google and read up on what Pan-Africanism means, and I guess it's basically a movement to unify African people living in Africa under one banner or one country. Basically, is I guess is what you're looking for. I guess an offshoot of this would be kind of maybe Pan-Africanism in the United States, where black people can form our own country here in the United States, or something, along the lines of what the Native Americans have. They have their own little section of land, and they're semi-autonomous. They're still under the rule of the federal government, but they get to make their own laws, in a sense. I don't know. As far as Pan-Africanism, there's a lot of problems with that. As far as trying to unite Africa under one banner, ignorant people, they think when you say Africa, they think the dark Somalian, Ethiopian starving kid. That's not. Even though that's present in Africa, that isn't all of Africa. Africa is a very diverse continent. It's probably one of the most diverse continents on this planet, as far as the color of people and beliefs, history, background. Africa is extremely diverse. Uniting Africa under one banner, under one government, would be very difficult. It would be extremely difficult. Many people would resist such a unification. The northern Africa is primarily Islamic, whereas the central and southern regions favor more of Christianity. And you have these conflicts that are breaking out in Africa right now between Muslims and Christians all over the place. And where my parents are from, where my father's from in Nigeria, there are frequently skirmishes between Christians in the western part of Nigeria and Muslims in the northern parts of Nigeria. Yeah, so that would be very difficult to try to unite Africa based strictly on religious grounds. And Muslims are particularly militant when it comes to other religions and being under a government that is not Islamic in nature. So Muslims, it would be very difficult to convince them to try to align in some African government. Another problem is that there's quite a diversity in wealth of the countries in Africa. Some countries in Africa are very rich, have lots of resources. Places like South Africa, Libya, that has lots of money and oil. Most of the wealth in Africa is concentrated in the North Africa. Places where there's oil and the Mediterranean trade routes, and where they can do things like that. And so people aren't going to be willing to unite and have to share their wealth and basically try to help build nations that may not be so wealthy or well off. I mean, you have places like Somalia, that's one of the poorest places on earth. And it's chaotic. There's very little government or government structure, and I mean it's very only a step away from anarchy most of the time there. They have, Somali raiding parties off the shoreline that they can't deal with. So, yeah, I mean, that's another problem is wealth and economy and industry. People aren't going to be willing to share. And perhaps even probably one of the biggest factors that will keep Africa from being united is Europe and Europeans. Europeans, if they suspect that an African continent could unite, they would instantly recognize that such a unification would immediately make Africa the most powerful force on the planet, perhaps the most powerful force the world has ever seen. Africa is many times larger than Europe, several times larger than the United States, and just about as big as the Indochina subcontinent region. So that is a pretty large group of people on the continent. And with the economic and military power in the region, you can rest assured that Europeans would instantly be scared that they would lose their hold on world power. Because let's not beat around the bush. Europeans like to bully people around and like to come in and exploit the resources of countries they colonize, and then leave the people high and dry when the resources run out, when it's no longer profitable for them. So an African unification would definitely scare Europeans, and they would try everything in their power to prevent it from happening. There would be rhetoric in the United States and Britain about, terrorist leaders. I mean, just look at what's going on in Libya right now. A bunch of European nations got together and decided that it was time to oust an African leader. And so they assembled a military, flew into this African nation, and are helping to overthrow an African government, basically. And yet, Muammar Gaddafi, even though he may be a dictator, there are still other dictators who are just as big a threat, and NATO is too scared to go after them, right? They're not gonna do this with North Korea. They're not gonna do this with China. You know what I mean? And yet there's no country in Africa that can protect the sovereignty of Libya and keep NATO from interfering. You see, because if Africa were to unite, they would be able to stop NATO and the European powers from intervening militarily on the continent. And you would likely see a war from that. You would likely see a war between Africa, a unified Africa, and Europe. Forget about trying to assemble some kind of African country in the United States. If that's what you're looking for, you're going to be looking at a civil war. Most definitely. Because white people are going to be unwilling to give up any section of the country to African Americans. And to try to take it, you would have to take it by force. That is the only way. And you're looking at generations of warfare. And not to mention, since white people control so much in this country, you're going to be looking at economic sanctions and all kinds of stuff. Just look at what they did to Haiti. A country ruled by African slaves, the descendants of African slaves. And I mean, the European powers, they basically starved Haiti out. Kept them poor, kept them, permanent second-class citizens through economic, sanctions and all this. Not sanctions, but just basically, the backdoor screw job, So, I mean, Haiti is not. It's a very small country, But why is it poor? Why is Haiti one of the poorest places in the Western Hemisphere? When they have, a very booming sugar cane production industry, and they could that's a way in which they could use to become at least wealthier or establish some sort of economy that they can build upon. But yeah, I mean, whenever African people start to unite, the Europeans get scared and they try to do everything in their power to stop it. Because they're scared to lose their hold on the world. They're scared to lose their grip. It's gonna happen eventually. Eventually, it's a cycle. They can't hold on to power forever. One day the brown peoples of the world will break European dominance. And Europeans will be knocked down a few pegs. And perhaps once and for all, the world can stop seeing white skin as this magical quality. People can look at them for what they are. People. Greedy people at that. I'm already at 11 minutes on this video. In conclusion, Pan-Africanism would be very difficult to achieve. It would take years and years and probably cost thousands and thousands of lives. Is it worth it? Perhaps. But then again, there could be consequences. There could be, unintended consequences where you could create an empire basically that tries to oppress other people. So there's no telling what could come from Pan-Africanism. A democratic government in a Pan-African nation would be almost impossible. Yeah, that's all I want to say about that. I know it's a long video. Thanks for listening.